Amy Adams did not rise from instant recognition or early applause. And that is what makes her story quietly powerful, because long before red carpets, awards, and global admiration, she lived in the shadow of rejection, uncertainty, and relentless doubt. Growing up in a large family where money was tight and stability was rare, moving from place to place, learning early that nothing was guaranteed and that dreams required endurance before they required talent. And while many people now associate her name with elegance, intelligence, and emotional depth, few understand how long she existed outside the spotlight, how many years she worked without validation, and how often she was told, directly and indirectly, that she simply didn't fit the mold, because Amy Adams was never the obvious choice. Never the industry favorite, never the face executives rushed to bet on, and that invisibility could have broken her. But instead it shaped her patience, her humility, and her resilience, because she learned something early that would later define her career, that progress does not always look like momentum. Sometimes it looks like survival, like staying when it would be easier to leave, like continuing to show up when the room barely notices you, and for years that was her reality, working small roles, auditions that went nowhere, performances that earned praise but not opportunity. And in those moments, the world was not asking her to believe in herself. It was asking her to justify why she hadn't quit yet. And that question haunted her, not because she lacked confidence, but because she was human, because doubt doesn't disappear when you are passionate. It follows you quietly, whispering that maybe you waited too long. Maybe you missed your chance. Maybe talent isn't enough. And yet Amy stayed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but stubbornly, anchored by a belief that felt less like certainty and more like commitment. A commitment to the craft, to the process, to the quiet inner voice that said keep going even when logic suggested otherwise. And this is where her strength lived, not in bravado or self-promotion, but in endurance, because endurance is the kind of courage nobody applauds until it wins. And her journey through the industry was marked by being underestimated, by being seen as too nice, too safe, too soft, labels that in Hollywood often translate to forgettable, and Amy Adams refused to harden herself to be taken seriously. She refused to trade sincerity for edge or depth for spectacle. Instead, she leaned deeper into emotional truth, into vulnerability, into characters that felt real rather than impressive. And this choice slowed her rise but strengthened her foundation, because while others chased attention, she chased honesty. And honesty ages well, even if it takes longer to be noticed. And when the industry finally began to see her, it was not because she changed, it was because time revealed what persistence had been building all along. A performer capable of immense emotional range, quiet power, and transformative presence. Someone who could command a scene without demanding it. Who could make audiences feel without manipulating them, and that ability is rare, because it requires humility, patience, and deep self-trust, qualities forged only through struggle. And as recognition slowly arrived, Amy did not explode into stardom. She unfolded into it, step by step, role by role, performance by performance, each one adding weight to her credibility. And yet even then, success did not erase insecurity. It did not silence self-doubt. It simply changed its shape. Because the higher you rise, the more you fear falling. And Amy carried that fear quietly, using it not as a limitation but as fuel, pushing herself harder, preparing deeper, never assuming that praise meant permanence, because she understood how fragile opportunity can be, especially for women in an industry that measures worth with unforgiving precision. And this awareness made her disciplined, grounded, and deeply respectful of the work, because she knew nothing was owed, everything was earned. And this mindset kept her focused when attention grew louder, when expectations rose, when the world finally started watching closely. And at the heart of her story is a truth many avoid, that talent does not protect you from rejection. That passion does not guarantee recognition, and that success often arrives long after doubt has exhausted you. But Amy Adams stayed anyway. Not because she knew she would win, but because leaving would have meant betraying the part of herself that believed art mattered. And that belief sustained her through years of invisibility, through moments of quiet despair, through the slow grind that most people never see. And this is why her success feels earned rather than gifted, because it is rooted in patience, humility, and emotional bravery. And as her journey continued, as her name became associated with excellence rather than possibility, the challenges shifted but did not disappear. Because what came next would test not only her talent, but her resilience in the face of pressure, expectation, and the unrelenting gaze of an industry that rarely allows women to age, evolve, or exist without judgment. And this was only the beginning of the chapter, where her strength would be tested in ways far deeper than auditions or rejection. As Amy Adams moved deeper into the industry, recognition finally began to knock, but it did not arrive with comfort or certainty. It arrived with pressure, scrutiny, and a new kind of fear. The fear of being seen and still not being enough. Because when doors start opening after years of rejection, every opportunity feels fragile, like it could disappear just as quickly as it arrived. And Amy carried that awareness with her into every role, every set, every performance, not as insecurity but as seriousness. A quiet determination to never waste the chance she had fought so long to earn. And while audiences began to notice her brilliance, the industry still hesitated, still questioned, still tested her limits, often offering roles that asked her to shrink, soften, or stay pleasant rather than powerful. And this was another crossroads, one that many never survive, because it is easier to accept what is offered than to wait for what aligns. Easier to stay visible than to stay truthful, and Amy chose truth again, choosing roles that demanded emotional honesty even when they were uncomfortable. Roles that required her to sit inside complexity rather than perform likability. And this choice was risky, because Hollywood does not reward risk equally, especially for women, but Amy understood something deeper, that longevity is built on respect, not volume, on depth, not constant exposure. And as her performances grew more layered, more demanding, something shifted. Critics began to speak differently, not about her potential, but about her presence. Her ability to disappear into characters, to carry emotional weight without forcing it, to make silence speak as loudly as dialogue. And this kind of mastery cannot be rushed. It comes from living with doubt long enough to understand it, from failing quietly enough times to learn humility, and from trusting the craft more than the applause. And yet with growing acclaim came a new burden, expectation. The demand to prove again and again that success was not accidental, that praise was deserved, that she could repeat what she had done without losing herself. And this pressure followed her everywhere, because success does not silence doubt, it amplifies it, it raises the stakes. It turns every performance into a question mark, and Amy met this pressure not by hardening her image or playing it safe, but by leaning even further into vulnerability, allowing herself to be emotionally exposed on screen in ways that required courage rather than confidence. And this vulnerability became her signature, not weakness, but strength, because it takes immense bravery to be seen fully, to let audiences witness uncertainty, longing, fear, and quiet resilience without hiding behind spectacle. And as awards conversations grew louder and recognition became more public, Amy remained remarkably grounded, often speaking openly about self-doubt, about fear, about the emotional cost of her work, not to appear relatable, but because she refused to pretend that success had healed every insecurity. And this honesty resonated deeply, especially with those who understood that growth does not erase vulnerability. It deepens it, because the more you care, the more you risk losing. And Amy cared deeply about the work, about the stories she told, about honoring characters with emotional truth rather than performance. And this care is exhausting. It demands emotional labor that does not turn off when the cameras stop, and yet she continued, choosing integrity over ease, depth over comfort, even when the emotional toll was heavy, because she believed that art mattered, that stories mattered, that showing the complexity of human experience was worth the personal cost. And this belief shaped her career into something rare, a body of work defined not by trend or image, but by substance, by characters that lingered, by performances that stayed with audiences long after the screen faded. And as her reputation solidified, as she became synonymous with excellence rather than emergence, the industry's gaze intensified, analyzing every choice, every performance, every absence, because success invites entitlement, The world begins to feel ownership over your journey, and Amy navigated this with quiet strength, refusing to rush, refusing to explain herself, trusting that her work would speak louder than speculation, and this restraint protected her, because in an industry obsessed with constant visibility, knowing when to step back is an act of power, and as she continued evolving,